Okay, we're back with Gary West, the former, unfortunately, or soon to be former, host of the Pipeline BBC Radio Scotland show that's been going on for time immemorial for more than 100 years, or 100 years anyway, unfortunately being wrapped up now. So in the first part, we talked a little bit about the kind of reasons behind the change in direction, according to you. I thought maybe this time let's talk about some of the highlights, some of the things when you look back, as well as looking forward. So, how about over the last 20 years? How have you seen piping change? And for that matter, in your own kind of piping career, all your life?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like probably many piping and drumming fans, I grew up listening to the weekly radio program on piping on Radio Scotland, whatever it happened to be called at any given point. And the George McElwam era, and Ian McInnes, of course, who ended up being my producer for most of my 20 years, but was a presenter for a good, I don't know, 15 years, I think, maybe before that. David Murray, and some Donald MacLeod. There's recordings of Donald MacLeod presenting, and John McFadden, and there's a whole host of people have sat in that seat over the years. So I think the first thing is I consider it a huge privilege to have been given the chance to do that. And I mean that genuinely. That's not just a platitude. It was having grown up listening to actually get the chance to do it. Totally by accident 21 years ago. So how it happened was Ian McInnes had decided to take a sabbatical for a year. Ian had many interests and is a musician, as you know, and he'd been doing the BBC for a long time, and he applied for and got a sort of year sabbatical and was asked to suggest some people who might be able to fill in for a year. And so I went for an audition. I had to sort of make a kind of 20-minute feature program as my audition. And I don't know if you remember, but it was myself and Robert Wallace who shared the first year week about, because neither of us could kind of commit. And then after Ian came back, they asked if Ian would move to producing, and Ian's a very fine producer of many kinds of music. So Ian was producing Travelling Folk and various other programs as well as Pipeline, and asked if I would stay on as the presenter. So yeah, it was completely by accident. Never planned it, never looked for a career in broadcasting at all. And as you said, I carried on my academic career all that time. I left the university just a couple of years ago during lockdown to focus on Pipeline, sadly. So I'm not sure that was such a good decision now, but anyway, and other things. I wanted to get playing again. I didn't really have time to actually play, so yeah, that's how it happened. In terms of the changes, well, I think we talked about that a little bit in the last section, but there have been enormous changes in some respects, and in other respects, perhaps things haven't changed all that much. If I mean, you and I both played pipe bands for many years at a reasonably high level, and I actually went back to had a couple of seasons with the Glasgow Police just before lockdown. It was my brother Neil West, who I grew up playing with in the Vale. He joined the police, had his career in the police, including in the band, and he played every percussion instrument, I think, in the band. He was a snare drummer, then moved to tenor, and then moved to bass, and he retired again a couple of years ago. So he said to me, why don't you come to the band and we can get a couple of seasons together before he retires? So I thought, well, why not? So I did that. And I'd forgotten how scary it is, first of all, standing on the start line in the circle at the Worlds, or anywhere for that matter. And then I remembered immediately why I'd left 25 years before, and if you'd asked me 25 years ago, if you come and do this again in 25 years, will you still have to march into the circle with a two-pace roll at the World Championships? I think I would have said no, and we're still doing it. So that's something that hasn't changed. I think I think I've probably interviewed every grade one pipe major at some point over the last 20 years. And I think whether on air or off air, I've asked them all the same question: is it time for the medley to change? And they've all said, yeah, absolutely. It's time to do a kind of concert type thing in the circle, at least in grade one. And yet it's never happened. So I find that slightly strange. I thought that would have changed, but it hasn't. The Grade One Medley hasn't changed that much since you guys won it in 1987 with the 78th Fraser's kind of, that's often talked of, that set that you won with as the sort of turning point, the kind of beginning of the construction of the modern medley. I'm not sure things have changed all that much, a lot more harmony and counterpoint and so on now. But it's still the same basic format. So that hasn't changed. The standards have changed enormously. I think when I was playing with the Vale and we were maybe getting, I think the third in the world was the highest we ever managed. Even, you would listen back in the sort of third place, fourth place, then you were hearing Fs and high As out and stuff like that. Whereas, all the qualifiers now are pretty well immaculate in terms of our actual sound. So, 20 years ago, the pipe band concert idea was already well developed. So I suppose what I'm saying, although I haven't really thought about it, but I suppose what I'm saying here is that the pipe band scene hasn't really changed a great deal in those 20 years. The midsections, yes. I think that's much more part of the sound than it was 20 years ago even. But apart from that, hasn't changed greatly. And I'm talking as a commentator, but also briefly as a competitor for those 2 years. Solo piping, obviously there's new names coming through, but again, the same names are winning now as were winning 20 years ago. Very often, the Roddy McLeod and William McCallum and Ian Spears and Angus McCall and Bruce Gandy and Jack Lee and many others, but it's still the prize lists probably haven't changed a huge amount in 20 years. So I'm talking off the top of my head here because I haven't really thought about this, but I suppose what I'm saying is, yes, there have been some enormous changes in terms of the contexts, but have a lot of these changes maybe been at the folky end, maybe, of things? And the acceptance of that's certainly changed. We used to get letters of complaint from Mr. Angry of wherever quite regularly, anytime a guitar made an appearance, and either they've given up or it's more acceptable now. But I think the standard of musicianship, some traditionalists, shall we say, they do still complain at the folky stuff, but you have to say the standards at the folky end of things are just incredible. There's so many fantastic musicians doing amazing things, and the people playing with them, I think that's been a big change. People now understand the drone aesthetic in a way that they maybe didn't 20 years ago. So a keyboard player or a guitar player, bouzouki player, whatever, they know now that they can't just, if they're accompanying pipes, play the chords that they might play if they were accompanying a fiddle, because there's something else happening the whole time. And it took pipe bands a long time to work this out as well in concerts, I think. I think there was a tendency for a while to phone up a keyboard player the week before a big concert and say, would you come and join in for a few sets? Now, well, Inverary's pre-Worlds concert this last year, for example, it was an amazing musical experience. I was lucky enough to compare it, therefore I was standing right at the side of the stage for the whole thing. And all of that music is so thought out, weeks, months in advance. The backing, not just the pipes and drums, but what's happening round about it. And I suspect we've learned from the Bretons quite a lot with that kind of thing as well. So I think things are more accomplished, more polished, more thought out musically in the concert hall. Certainly, if things haven't changed greatly in the competition circle, as I said, then they've got more sophisticated, definitely on the concert platform, no doubt
Yeah,
about that.
it's interesting that I guess 20 years ago maybe the pipe band concert would have been competition led. Okay, here's our march to spades and reels and our two medleys and the 6/8 marches we tune up with, and but now it seems like it may be shifting the other way, where the stuff you develop for the stage is going to make its way into the competition. Maybe we can hope for that anyway.
I think so, yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. But there's still not that many concerts, platforms, chances to do that. That's, so any given top pipe band might get the pre-Worlds concert, what, once a decade or something,
Yeah.
or once 7, 8 years. You've got bands like Simon Fraser who have carried on. I'm talking here of someone who now looks for CDs to play on my show, and it's hard to get pipe band CDs now. No one's making them. Simon Fraser, you could always rely on them to, a CD every couple of years over the 20 years I've been doing it. And one or two other bands too. But I do worry about that. Is one thing I worry about is if people are not making CDs, how are we going to hear everyone's music? Especially if BBC doesn't record it. Yes, people can record their own music to a certain extent, but I do worry about the chances of people hearing good quality recorded music going forward when the CD is becoming a thing of the past. I was always very conscious. I think I underplayed pipe bands on the show simply because there was not enough material. It's really hard to go and record a pipe band now. It's impossible, actually, unless you hire the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall or something of that scale. How do you record a full pipe band now? There's no studio in the land that's big enough, and even the big studios that orchestras will record in. Orchestras don't have 15 percussionists, so you have to do it outside to get a proper pipe band recording. I think now, unless you're in a major hall, you have to do it outside, and we've got Scottish weather or Canadian weather or whatever. So I do worry about our ability for good quality recordings. Anyone can stick up a phone at the side of a circle, in a competition, but you're hearing the crowd, you're hearing one part of the band. I do worry about that, actually. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's interesting, very astute observation. All right, so over the last 20 years, how about a few of your more memorable or your favorite pipeline shows or parts of shows? Anything come to mind?
I reckon I've done just short of 1,000. So the danger is they all melt into one, I think any time I've managed to get out and about, outside broadcasts, that's so much more fun, first of all, than sitting in a studio essentially talking to myself. I mean, it's a weird thing, well, it's like what we're doing right now. We know hopefully someone will be listening to it at some point, but at the moment we're conversing with each other. When you're doing a radio program, you don't even have the equivalent of the other person, you're just staring at a microphone. So anything would have got out and about. Going to places that you wouldn't normally go to. So maybe to a piping society. Remember, we did a concert, or we recorded a concert at Inverness Piping Society. We've done ones in Dumfries. We've done ones in various places where it just feels real, and that involves what we would call an eavesdrop. We are there just capturing what's happening anyway, without necessarily having any say on what's going to happen. We might obviously agree it would be good if you could get so and so, because we haven't had him on the program or her on the program for a while or whatever. But essentially, you're just capturing what's happening anyway, and that can be a lot of fun. You never know what's going to happen. I suppose, sadly, some of the very memorable ones have been ones where I've had to announce people's passing, and there's been a lot of that over the 20 years. The one that, on a purely personal level, that sticks in my mind is Gordon Duncan, because I grew up with Gordon. We learned to play together. and even, that's 2005. What's that? 18 years ago. It still feels very raw and recent, and having to make a program about that was hard. So I suppose it sticks in my head from that point of view. But Gordon's left us an amazing legacy of music and influence, and it's so nice again to see people coming through where they name check him as but that's just a very personal thing because he was a mate of mine. World Championships are always a lot of fun. There's a real buzz down on the park, and then we've always gone out live at night. And I know you've been in the studio, you've witnessed that, and the results are so late coming out sometimes that we've got very little time to decide what music we're going to play and what order to play it in and to announce the results and all the rest of it. And that's always feels very real and immediate, and it's always nice if we have someone in the studio like yourself and others who have done it to kind of bounce off during the what can be a fairly hectic time. So yeah, and in terms of programs, I made a program about Martin Bennett just a couple of years ago, and that seemed to hit a spot with a lot of people. I got a lot of messages about that one. Again, Martin died sadly in the same year as Gordon, and the same year as John Burgess, actually. So we lost 2005 was a bad year for piping and for Scottish music, but I've actually been writing a biography of Martin, and I now need to sit and finish it. That's one thing I'll be doing. So I made a program specifically about his music, and it just seemed to hit a spot for some reason. A lot of people, I suppose a lot of people in the piping world didn't really know Martin because he ended up being, he was a piper first and foremost, but he was also a highly skilled classical violinist and became the darling of the sort of beats dance floor. But he was a fantastic piper, and I think maybe that was a surprise to a lot of people who knew him for other things or didn't know him at all, So that's one of my more recent programs that just seemed to, I don't know, hit a spot. I did get quite a few messages about that, but so, and every Glenfiddich, every Northern Meeting, every World Championships, these are the three, or every Piping Live. We always record a couple of things at Piping Live, being out and about amongst people. And I mentioned Simon Fraser earlier. I made a program about them once simply because I was invited with my academic hat on to Simon Fraser University to give a big lecture one year. I think it was a St Andrews lecture. On nothing to do with piping, actually. And I thought, well, while I'm there, I might as well take microphone. And so I went to one of the practices and went back to Terry's house and made a feature program about a pipe band in that sense. I can't remember when it was, maybe 2006 or something. And that was a lot of fun. Sadly, the budget didn't extend to doing that too often, but well, actually the BBC didn't have to pay for it at all now I think about it. So a lot of great memories, and working, as I said earlier, for almost all but 2 years of my time on Pipeline, I worked with Ian McInnes as my producer, and Ian is second to none in terms of his knowledge. You do have to have your wits about you in terms of all of the scenes, solo piping, pibroch, pipe bands, the folky side of things. There's not many people have that breadth of knowledge that Ian certainly has, and I learnt a lot from him. So I'm very grateful to Ian as well and I'm sure he'll be sad to see Pipeline go as well.
Yeah, well, it's you kind of pointed people to if there is an archive, if the programs are going to be kept available going forward, can look some of these up. So on that question, are all the programs going to be available? In the future?
There's a lot of complexity about that, actually, which I do understand. So at the moment, any Radio Scotland programme is up on BBC Sounds for 4 weeks after it's broadcast, and then it's taken down. And every single programme, as I understand it, is archived within the BBC. So every programme there's ever been on piping should be there somewhere in the BBC. In terms of accessibility for the general public, that's much more difficult. And I understand why, and I'll just try and explain why, just so that it's clear. It would be wonderful to take every one of these programs, make them, put them up on a website or whatever. But obviously, the artists have to be protected, the copyright holders, the composers. So every program I've ever made, I have to write a return, fill in a return, basically that name checks every single tune. So obviously, if it's a pipe band set with a dozen tunes in it or whatever, or well, maybe not as many as that, but I have to try and find the composer. I have to try and find the publisher. I have to say exactly the length of time that it's been played for. Which, dividing up a modern pipe band set, sometimes I was none the wiser when one tune started in the next one, or one finished in the next one. So I have to give, it's very precise. And the BBC then sends that return into the authorities. So in the UK, it will be the Performing Rights Society and the MCPS, which is the Mechanical Protection Society, something. And that means that the money from the broadcast of that music should eventually make its way back to the composers and the performers, if they've registered the tunes with these organizations and so on. And if you came in and did a session for Pipeline, then the nature of the whatever agreement you signed at the time would determine whether you were due any payments for a repeat fee, for example. Sometimes it was one fee only, or a fee for one broadcast only. Sometimes the contracts change from time to time. Sometimes it was maybe one broadcast plus one repeat, or one broadcast plus two repeats, or whatever. And so if given that, given all the flow of money and the rights, if suddenly all of that became publicly accessible, then, the musicians themselves and the composers might have something to say about it, quite rightly. And, okay, we're in a world where we suspect most people would probably be okay about it. Most people might be quite happy for their session from 1995 to be publicly available, but some might not, because they're professional musicians and they deserve to be paid if people are then going to access that. So it's very, very complex. The flow of money, the rights, the contracts, and all of that. And as speaking with my artist hat on for a minute, I understand that. So it's not just as simple as making the programs absolutely available, carte blanche, for anybody to come and listen to or download or what have you. That said, it's not impossible. And if it was possible for a public archive, or let's say the National Piping Centre, for example, or some other organisation to host an archive of BBC music, and we're able to sort out all of that stuff. Or it would really involve writing, I suppose, trying to get in contact with every single musician, every single composer, and saying, is this okay? So it would be an enormous administrative task, actually.
Yeah.
So it's like any archive, it's always that balance between accessibility and protection of rights of the people whose music and art it actually is. And it's not an easy balancing act,
Well, hopefully they'll be able to figure something out, because it is such a treasure trove of recordings that historically important, and important for education and so on. All right, so just wrapping things up, it can't be the end of the line for your work in piping. It's bread in the bone. What might we look forward to from Gary West in the future?
Well, I want to keep going because I really enjoy it, and so I'm going independent. I'm going to start my own podcast very soon, I hope. I'm just trying to set that up at the moment. I've finished every program I've ever made with Pipeline with the same naff phrase. I don't know how I ended up with a catchphrase, which is very retro. But anyway, enjoy your piping. So I'm gonna take that with me. So enjoy your piping with Gary West is going to be my new podcast, available wherever podcasts are available in various platforms. Hoping to maybe manage to get a little bit of sponsorship or support. Podcasts are free. People are not used to paying for podcasts, so it will be free. But I'll set up a wee subscription thing, like many people do, like you do on your site as well, so that if people want to support it, then they'll be able to pay a small monthly fee. But that's entirely voluntary. It will be free to listen to. I'm hoping, I've got a small studio set up. I'm hoping to be able to keep the live music sessions going, and pay them properly. So, if anyone's up for sponsoring a session or anything like that, so that the artists can get paid and cover a little bit of the costs of the studio and so on, then, I'll try and set something up along those lines. And just try and keep things going, basically. I won't have the means to go and record World Championships or any of the big competitions, but I'm hoping that the BBC will step forward and keep doing that, as I said earlier. So enjoy your piping with Gary West. That's my aim.
That's great.
And I'm just trying, what I've just been talking about music rights, it's a minefield for podcasts. So I'm trying to work my way through that at the moment. I have bought my PRS podcast music license though. So I'm hopefully on the right lines and keeping it all legal, which of course is very important. Sure. So yeah, that's I'm hoping to launch that in the next couple of weeks, actually. So if anyone wants, I do have a website which is just garywest.scot, and I'll put full information there if anyone wants to seek it out.
Really look forward to that. I'm sure it's going to be a really quality production for sure, based on all of your experience, and certainly good to listen to with your radio voice. It's great. But Gary, it's been a pleasure speaking with you over these two parts, and on behalf of the piping and drumming world, thank you for everything that you've done for so long. We really appreciate it. We're going to miss you on the radio, but look forward to hearing you on your upcoming podcast, and wish you nothing but success in the future.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I appreciate that. I was just thinking, you've got a good radio voice too. There might be a job going at the BBC. You should give them a call. But...
I've got my hands full enough. All right. Thanks again.
I appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.